The wind rolled over the plains like a whisper from the dead, stirring the dry grass and carrying with it the faint scent of rain that never came. Thomas Carter stood by the splintered fence of his ranch, his hat tilted low against the sun, watching the horizon stretch into nothing. It had been 20 years since laughter had filled his home, 20 years since the fire took Sarah and the child she carried. Time had made him lean and quiet, like the land itself, worn down but unbroken. He spoke to no one, ate little, and drank only enough to forget the ache in his chest. Folks in town said he was just another ghost out on the prairie, living more from habit than hope. That morning, he rode into town for supplies, salt, coffee, nails, and feed. The sky was heavy with dust, and the road felt longer than usual. When he reached the town square, something strange was happening. Soldiers had set up a platform near the general store, and people had gathered around, whispering in low, uneasy tones. The sharp voice of an officer cut through the air, commanding silence. Carter tied his horse to a post and walked closer, boots thudding against the hard ground. On the platform stood a young woman. Her wrists were bound with rope, her bare feet caked in dust, her face streaked with dirt and sweat. But her back was straight, her eyes clear and steady as they swept across the crowd. An Apache, Carter realized. The last one he'd ever seen this close. The officer beside her was reading from a paper, saying words that made Carter's stomach twist. She was government property, to be relocated or sold for labor, for the good of civilization. The people watched like they were at some grim show. She's the last one, someone said. The army cleared the rest out. Killed most, I reckon. She's a savage, another voice spat. Don't belong here. Carter kept his eyes on her face. She didn't flinch when they spoke, didn't cry, didn't plead. But he noticed the tattoo on her arm, a snake coiled around two feathers, faint but familiar. It stopped him cold. He remembered that mark from long ago, when he'd been a younger man caught in a skirmish near the San Carlos River. He had been pinned under his horse, bleeding out, when an Apache warrior had spared his life. He remembered that same snake mark painted on the man's spear. The warrior had looked at him, then turned away, vanishing into the brush. Carter had never forgotten. Before he knew what he was doing, he was stepping forward. How much? The officer blinked. Sir, this isn't. I asked how much, Carter said again, his voice low and steady. The officer hesitated. $5. That's regulation for captured property. Carter reached into his coat, pulled out his last coins, and slapped them into the man's palm. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Old fool's gone mad, someone whispered. But Carter didn't hear them. He walked up the steps, cut the ropes from the woman's wrists, and nodded toward the road. Come on, he said quietly. You're free, or as free as this world allows. She looked at him then, long, dark eyes that searched his face like she was reading something written beneath his skin. Then she followed him, saying nothing. They left the murmuring crowd behind, dust rising from the hooves of his horse as they rode away. The sun was dipping low by the time they reached his ranch. The land stretched out silent and endless, with the remains of an old barn and a house that leaned slightly to one side. He stopped near the well and dismounted, offering her a hand. She didn't take it. She slid down on her own, her movements graceful despite exhaustion. He fetched her a blanket, a tin cup of water, and pointed toward the barn. You can sleep there. Roof leaks a bit, but it's dry. She took the water but didn't drink right away. Her gaze roamed the land, cautious, measuring. Why you by me? She asked finally, her voice rough and quiet, like wind through dry grass. He hesitated. Don't rightly know. Guess it didn't sit right, seeing you up there like that. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded once and walked toward the barn without another word. That night, Carter couldn't sleep. The house felt different, as though something living had returned to it. He sat by the window, staring out toward the barn, watching the faint glow of the moon on its broken roof. For years, the only sound had been the creak of the windmill and the coyote's cry. Now he thought he could hear her soft footsteps in the dirt, the quiet rustle of someone breathing who wasn't a ghost. The next morning, he found her outside at dawn, kneeling by the fence with a hammer and a coil of wire. Fence breaks, she said when he approached. Coyotes come. He blinked. You fixing my fence? She didn't look up. You feed me. I fix fence. He wanted to protest, but something about her tone made him stop. She wasn't doing it for thanks, she was doing it because it made sense. Because it was life, and life kept moving. Days passed, turning into weeks. She stayed mostly silent, working from sunrise to sunset. She gathered herbs, repaired tools, and mended old clothes she found in the barn. He learned her name from the way she spoke to herself sometimes, Ayana. When he tried to say it aloud, she laughed quietly, shaking her head. You say it like white man, she told him. It means eternal blossom. Carter smiled a little at that. Ain't much that blooms out here. She looked toward the hills. Everything blooms, if it remembers how. Little by little, the silence between them softened. He began leaving food by the barn each night, and she began leaving small tokens by his porch, woven grass charms, feathers, or bundles of sage that smelled of smoke and earth. Once, when he found her by the river, washing clothes, she sang something low and haunting. The sound drifted across the water and made his chest ache in a way he hadn't felt in years. But the town didn't stop talking. When he rode in for supplies, he could feel their stares. You still got that savage out there? One man asked. Ain't safe, Carter. You don't know what she's capable of. Carter only said, I know what she's capable of. More than you ever will. Then he paid and left. One evening near sunset, 3 men rode up to the ranch, half drunk and full of hate. They dismounted near the barn, torches in hand. We're here for the squaw, one shouted. Ain't right, Carter. You can't keep her here. Carter stepped off his porch, rifle in hand, eyes cold. I ain't keeping nobody. She's a savage, another growled. You protecting her. You one of them now. Ayana stepped out of the shadows then, calm and straight-backed. The firelight glinted off her eyes. You call me savage, she said softly, but you burn what you fear. The men laughed until Carter cocked the rifle. The sound silenced them. You best leave, he said. They hesitated, muttered curses, and rode off into the dark. Carter watched until they vanished. His hands trembled slightly as he lowered the gun. Ayana stood beside him, her voice low. You didn't have to. He looked at her. Yeah, I did. For a long moment, neither spoke. The stars came out, bright and unblinking, and the cool night wrapped around them. Later, sitting by the fire, he asked, Why'd you stay? You could have run. She looked at him, eyes reflecting the flames. Where to run? My people gone. But the land still remembers us. Maybe here, I remember too. Carter nodded slowly, the words settling deep in him. The wind outside shifted, carrying the faint smell of rain. And for the first time in decades, he felt like the earth might forgive him, just a little. The summer came harsh and merciless that year, a fire-breathing wind rolling across the plains and swallowing every hint of green. The sun seemed to burn closer to the earth, bleaching the sky white and leaving everything thirsty. Dust clung to Carter's boots, to the windows, to the inside of his lungs. The water in the well sank lower each day. He rose before dawn to work the fields, though the soil crumbled in his hands like ash. Ayana worked beside him, her long black hair tied back with a strip of cloth, her face streaked with sweat and determination. Neither of them said much, but in their silence, there was a rhythm, a quiet understanding born of survival. When the fever came, it came without warning. One morning Carter simply didn't get up. Ayana found him in bed, his skin hot and clammy, his breathing shallow. She ran to the barn, fetched cool water, tore one of her dresses into strips, and pressed them against his forehead. For 3 days he drifted in and out of consciousness, whispering things that made no sense, Sarah's name, the sound of fire, the cries of horses. Sometimes he reached out like a man chasing a memory he couldn't hold. She never left his side. She fed him what little broth she could make, kept the flies away, and prayed in her own tongue to the spirits of the wind and earth. When he muttered apologies to a wife long gone, she held his hand and whispered, Rest. She forgives. By the 4th morning, the fever broke. Carter woke to find her asleep beside the bed, her head resting on her folded arms, the morning light spilling across her face. He stared for a long time, listening to the sound of her steady breathing. Something stirred inside him, something quiet and new. He realized how much he had come to depend on her presence, how her voice had softened the edges of his grief, how her calm strength had filled the hollow spaces that had once been filled by ghosts. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her eyes fluttered open. You live, she said simply, a small smile touching her lips. Guess so, he murmured. You kept me alive. You stubborn, she replied softly. Hard to kill. He chuckled weakly. I'll take that as a compliment. She made him drink water, then went outside to tend the animals. From his window, he watched her move through the morning light, strong and graceful, the dust rising around her feet. He thought of Sarah, How she used to hum while she worked, how her laughter once filled this place, and he realized it was not betrayal to remember both women with the same tenderness. It was simply life finding its way forward. As he regained his strength, the drought deepened. The crops failed, and a few of the cattle died. Yet somehow, Ayana managed to keep things from falling apart. She dug channels for water runoff, collected rain in clay pots, and gathered wild roots from the hills. When the nights grew unbearably hot, she sang by the river, her voice echoing through the darkness like a promise that the land would heal again. One evening, as the sun melted into a blood-red horizon, they sat outside together. He watched her grind herbs with a smooth stone. "You know," he said, "if you hadn't come along, this place would have died with me." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "No place dies," she said. "Only people forget how to listen to it." He nodded. "You've got a way with words." She smiled faintly. "Words are wind. It's what you do that matters." Their eyes met for a heartbeat too long, and he looked away, clearing his throat. "Well, I'll do my best to listen, then." For a while, they lived like that, quiet, balanced, almost peaceful. But peace was something the West rarely allowed. It was near dusk when Carter saw the dust cloud rising in the distance. 4 riders, uniformed, armed, moving fast. The moment he saw them, a weight settled in his gut. He knew. They were coming for her. The soldiers dismounted near the house, their horses restless, eyes hard beneath the brim of their hats. The officer leading them held a paper in his gloved hand. "Thomas Carter," he said sharply. "You're harboring government property." Carter didn't move. "There's no property here," he said quietly. The officer's gaze shifted to Ayana, who had stepped out of the barn, standing tall, unflinching. "She's an Apache, a ward of the U.S. Army. She's to be transferred east. She's free," Carter said. The officer's eyes narrowed. "That's not for you to decide." Before anyone could speak again, Ayana took a step forward. "I am not property," she said in English thick with her accent. "I stay here. This my land now." "You have no land," the officer snapped. "You have no rights." Carter's hand tightened around his rifle. "She's got the same rights as any soul breathing," he said. The officer motioned to his men. "Take her." Carter raised the rifle, the sound of the hammer cocking loud in the still air. The soldiers froze. For a moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the wind and the slow creak of leather. "You'll hang for this," the officer warned. "Maybe," Carter said, "but you'll bleed first." The words came from somewhere deep, deeper than pride, deeper than reason. Ayana stood behind him, silent, the sun catching the glint of a knife in her hand. The tension hung like thunder in the air. Then, without another word, the officer lowered his hand. "Mount up," he ordered finally. "We'll report this to the command post." They rode off, leaving a trail of dust that shimmered in the dying light. Carter stood there for a long time, the rifle still in his hands, until Ayana gently touched his arm. "You didn't have to," she whispered. He turned to her, eyes weary. "Yes, I did. You've already lost enough." Her gaze softened. "You would fight your own kind for me." He nodded. "I've fought worse for less." That night, they sat by the porch again, the sky heavy with clouds that promised rain. The first drops began to fall, cool and slow, darkening the dust at their feet. Ayana tilted her face to the sky, letting the rain wash over her. "You could have let me go," she said quietly. "Saved yourself trouble." He looked at her, the lines in his face deep but kind. "Maybe, but I reckon trouble's better than emptiness." She smiled faintly. "You sound like my grandfather. He say same thing before soldiers came." Carter's voice grew soft. "Your grandfather, the one with the snake mark on his spear." Her eyes widened slightly. "How you know that?" He told her then, about the battle, the chaos, the young Apache warrior who spared his life years ago. He described the mark, the moment their eyes met, the mercy that had haunted him since. When he finished, she sat silent, her breath catching. "That man," she said finally, "was my father." The world seemed to still around them. Rain fell harder now, tapping against the porch roof like drums. "Then maybe," he said slowly, "this was meant to be." She reached out, her hand trembling slightly as it found his. "Maybe your life was meant to be given back," she whispered. He held her hand, rough against smooth, weathered against wild. For a long time, they sat that way, two souls from broken worlds, bound by something neither of them could name. By morning, the rain had passed, leaving the land washed clean. The air smelled of sage and promise. The sun rose over the hills, soft and golden, touching the fields. With new light, Carter stood beside Ayanna, watching as the first shoots of green pushed through the earth. He glanced at her and smiled, not with joy but with peace, the kind that only comes when the past finally lays itself to rest. She looked back at him, her voice barely a whisper. "You see, the land remembers." He nodded, his heart full. "And so do we." The wind swept through the valley, carrying their words away like seeds. And for the first time in many years, Thomas Carter didn't feel alone, not in the world, not in the silence, not in the memories of what was lost. The ranch was alive again, and so was he.